Is that screen up?
Yes, the screen
The
is shared.
bibliostat? Okay, great. So we're ready to get started?
We are.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and start. As I mentioned to Tammy, I think what we'll do is, I'm not sure how many new people are out there. I'm assuming that there's some that have not done this survey before. So I'll kind of give an overview of the process first, and then we'll kind of show you the Bibliostat Collect tool and then answer any questions along the way. So if you have questions as we go through things, just type it in the chat or unmute yourself and we'll deal with those as we go along. I think would be better than waiting until the end. So just real quick, as a matter of terminology, a lot of people refer to the survey as the Bibliostat survey. That's not entirely correct. The survey is called the Public Library Survey. And as we were mentioning before we started recording, this is a survey that's done in all states. It's a part of a national data collection plan by the Institute of Museum and Library Services. They publish their data every year from all 50 of those states, and you can retrieve it online. The only thing is that they're usually a year behind most states because the data collection cycles are staggered. It takes them usually about a year after we publish our data, for instance, to publish their data. So they're a little bit behind. They're usually a year outdated from what we publish. But if you did want to look at a library from another state, those data are out there on the IMLS website, and also probably from the state websites as well, depending on their publication cycle. Some are quick and some are a little slower. So this is the main page of our website. So Bibliostat, I'm sure you've heard of Bibliostat. Bibliostat is the vendor that we use to collect the public library survey data. About half the states use Bibliostat and the other half use a competitor's product called Counting Opinions. We've used Bibliostat, we're happy with it. It's relatively inexpensive compared to the other vendor. So that's the vendor that we use to collect the data. So you'll notice here, there's a link to the Bibliostat Collect login. We'll get to that in a minute. You'll notice here that this year's survey launches November 15th, and it runs through, let me minimize this, through February 11th, 2022. That's the data collection cycle for this year. If you get into a bind and for some reason you're having problems and you need an extension on that February 11th date, just send me an email and we can usually work with most people to give you a little extra time. If say you're having some problems getting reports from the city clerk or something comes up. We have a lot of people that maybe, we're intending to do it and they come down with an illness or they're out on leave for an extended period, or the financial officer's out, for instance, or something like that. Then you'll notice here, there's a blank copy of the survey in Word and PDF format. A lot of people like to print this out ahead of time and fill it in before they actually go into the collect tool and enter the data. And then we also have the survey with the changes highlighted. Yes.
I don't think we're seeing what you're talking about. We still see the main page of the Nebraska Library Commission's website.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
Let me go back and see. How do I change the screen share here? Let's see. Is it a control issue? So on your screen, it's just the main Library Commission site?
Yes.
So I'm not sure how to change that, Tammy.
Right now, it's not even showing the screen share, but it's up on the.
It's showing this. Let's see, when I change the tabs, nothing happens, huh?
No.
The tab wouldn't be, you wouldn't be seeing the tab. You only see what you drilled down on the original screen that you have.
I just made you the host, so maybe you have different options now? I had made you co-host before, but
Well, when I hover over the Zoom, it doesn't let me change anything down at the bottom,
Right.
which is unusual.
I would exit your screen share and start again.
Yeah, I'm not able to get to that.
it won't let you change the screen share?
You can, it should be up near the top to stop your screen share. That's weird. Maybe your view, you need to exit full screen.
Yeah, how do I exit to full screen?
Up in the upper right-hand corner, there's a little view with the Brady Bunch grid.
I see the chat, or I see. See.
And I gave you all controls now, so I can't do it.
I don't use Zoom very often. We usually use GoToWebinar. Yeah, the only thing that's showing up in the right-hand side, Tammy, is like kind of a list of participants, and then you know, I get options for mute audio, stop video.
And there's no way to stop share?
No.
So down at the bottom is your share screen.
Yeah,
If
I'm
you
not
go
even,
down to the bottom.
there is no share screen button.
Nowhere?
It's like it's
Go
stuck
down to the
on,
bottom of your screen and there'll be a share screen.
yeah, it's like stuck on full screen.
Yeah, but if you go down there, it'll highlight that toolbar. Same toolbar with your share video.
Yeah, it's not, there's nothing there. Like when I hover over the Zoom bar, I get meeting controls, the meeting is being recorded in Zoom Cloud Meetings. And when I click on any of those, nothing comes up.
Yeah, that's not what you want to do. It's down at the bottom of the screen. Very at the bottom of the screen, there's participants, there's share screen, there's record, all that down at the bottom.
Yeah, I don't see any of those buttons at the bottom.
Or stop video. Now we see your screen.
Yeah. So we
Is
see
it
it
up now?
with the windows.
We just see the Windows blank screen.
So now you can see Bibliostat Collect Login.
No,
No.
we see a
You can't,
blank
okay.
screen with the Windows logo.
I wonder if I should exit and come back.
Yeah, maybe try that.
Right, and don't put everything in tabs because your tab isn't going to be what's showing up.
When Sam exits, we'll all be kicked out and have to come back.
Oh, right, because
he's the
now
host.
the host. Maybe make me host before you go.
How do I do that?
If on my picture, there should be 3 buttons on the top right.
Make host. Okay, here.
Okay, I'm the host now. Okay.
You.
Yeah, I wish I had options to let you share.
Oh, here, it's over in my other tab. Now I see the thing. It's over. It's on my other monitor. Okay, let's see.
Here, we all had a learning opportunity.
Is anything coming up now?
Yes, we see the main screen of the library, and there's Bibliostat Collect. Awesome.
So now it's working. Okay.
Yeah.
Because now I see the little thing that Jack was describing, but it's on my other monitor, which is really unusual. I'm going to chalk this up to a Monday. Okay, I'm going to leave that over there. Okay, so everybody can see this now. Thumbs up. Okay, so this is what I was talking about before with the blank survey here. You can print it out. If you want to see what changes we made this year, you can print it out with changes highlighted here and here. We've also got a link to the survey instructions. The instructions are embedded in Bibliostat Collect. You can pull those up in Bibliostat as well. but you might want to look at the instructions, which has the definitions, the federal definitions for the federal questions, and then the state definitions for the questions that we ask at the state level. So you might want to look at that all as one document, and it's right here. We also have a FAQ about the program itself. There's also an FAQ embedded in the program as well. And then you might want to look at how these federal definitions, so there's some questions that every state has to ask that IMLS has told us that those are data that are important for them to collect at the national level. So those are questions that we have to ask on our survey that every other state collects those data too. This is the definition of how IMLS defines those, the one that we're stuck with. We can't change it. And then a public library survey guide for a new director. If you're a new director, this kind of gives you an overview of Bibliostat, kind of the process. If you're a new director, you can kind of go through this. I think it's a PowerPoint that's in PDF. And then a flow chart for how to count electronic things. We often get questions about how to count electronic databases. Is it a database? Is it not a database? This flow chart here, and I'll click on it and see if it comes up, kind of gives you an idea of, what to count where. So, and did that come up on your screen? Can you see that flow chart? Okay, good. So now we're good with the screen share. So you kind of start here, is user authentication required? Yes or no? And you kind of work your way through here, and that corresponds with the numbers in the federal definition. Or if you have questions about how to count electronic stuff like that, just send, you can also always send me an email. It may have been something that has came up before, a common question. I know that Overdrive has kind of absorbed some of the other vendors, so hopefully that'll make things easier on how to report things. And then we have a couple of Overdrive guides. We have an Overdrive circulation guide and an Overdrive Advantage numbers guide if you have an Overdrive Advantage or Advantage Plus account. The good news is if you're in the statewide Overdrive consortium, we pull the holdings and circulation numbers for you and pre-fill those on your survey. So if you're in the consortium, you don't have to deal with any of that. They'll be pre-filled on your survey. If you have another vendor, you'll have to maybe add to those numbers if there's a vendor other than Overdrive that you use. So anybody have any questions about this main page? If not, we'll go ahead and open Collect and get into the survey itself. Okay, so most of you should have your ID and your password. I usually email those to you. I think I sent out an email a couple of weeks ago, kind of just a notification about the surveys coming up. One thing to keep in mind, if you do lose your password, you can always go over here to our website and type in, I think it's passwords on our website. And you'll get a thing here. It's this third one down here that says Bibliostat password ID lookup. You can always click on that. And this is, like especially if you were trying to get a hold of your password and say it was after hours or on the weekend when you couldn't get a hold of anybody here at the commission, you can just type in your city here and hit submit, and an email will be automatically generated to the library director's account. And then your ID and password will come to the library director's email. So that's kind of nice to know if for some reason you need your password. One thing to keep in mind is that we use all zeros. Most of the login password problems that surface are because people enter a capital O instead of a zero because they kind of look alike. We don't use any capital O's on IDs and passwords. Those are all numbers. So whenever you see something like this, it's any 0000. Make sure that you're entering a 0 and not a capital O. Most of the login problems are due to that. But if you do have a login problem and you have entered the correct ID and password, let me know. It might be a problem on Bibliostat's end. So we have a test survey here. We're just going to enter test and see if we can get into that. And we were able to log in, which is good. And so you'll notice here, you'll have the current survey, which is the 2021 Public Library Survey. You have the option to continue, look at the status of it, or print it. For previous year surveys, you'll notice that you have this print, just this print icon for some of these previous years. That's because those are already completed and they're locked. And so you just have the option to print. And actually this one, the 2020, will be locked as well. I'm not sure why this is on right now, probably because we haven't launched the 2021 yet. But most of these are going to be locked and you only have the option to print. We also keep a local copy of your survey here at the commission. So if you have printing issues, you can always just email me if you want a copy of a prior year survey. You can always email me and I can just pull the PDF and send it to you. So in this case, we want to click on continue because we want to start the 2021 survey. And so you'll notice here, this is kind of like the general navigation of Bibliostat. You'll notice this survey navigation broken down by sections on the left-hand side. Show status gives you the status of your survey. We usually look at that at the end after we get done entering data to look at where our status is. Like if we have an unanswered question, the system also runs through a series of what we call edit checks. So what that does is the system will look at, say for instance, what you entered last year, and if there's a large change from last year, it'll flag an edit check and want to know why. Like say your revenue went from $100 to $100,000. It'll flag that as an edit check and want to know why, there's such a large increase. And then you have the print icon. You can print your survey here, the submit icon there. And this is the navigation button, the next, and then save the page here. And then you'll notice here those FAQs, the instructions that we talked about earlier. Survey list goes back to the page that we were just on. That'll show your prior year surveys. And then there's also a navigation button down here at the bottom that says save and next. And so if we go up to the top here, you'll notice here that this question, these first series of questions, these are in purple. See how this is purple right here? What that means is that these are federally required questions. So if they're in purple, these are the ones that we have to ask that are part of the National Collection Plan. Those are the federally required ones. If you have a question that's not in purple, like your fax number, for instance, or web address, those are in black. Those are state questions. Those are questions that we just ask at our state's level. You'll also notice here that this box is grayed out and we can't enter any data here. That means this field is pre-filled and it's locked, so you can't change that. If for some reason you do need to change that, say you legally changed the name of your library or you moved to a new address, you can just email me and I can go in and make those changes for you. The reason that we lock those fields is if, for instance, we've had some people that go in and they could maybe change the street address from spelled out street, S-T-R-E-E-T, to S-T period. That triggers an edit check on our end. And can create a lot of problems. So that's why these fields don't typically change. That's why they're locked, pre-filled with whatever was entered last year. And then you'll notice over here on the right-hand side, there's a flag button and a note button. So what the flag button is say you were navigating through your survey and you said, oh, we've moved to a new street address. I want to flag this question. I want to look at it later on. You can click on flag and you notice how that flag then turned red. What that means is that when you go to submit the survey later on, it'll say, hey, you have flagged questions. And so you'll have to unflag that question. And that's kind of just there as a reminder for you later on that, or it could be something like, say, as you're entering your data, you maybe remember that you have to add something to your numbers. So you can flag that kind of as a reminder later on. And then here's that note field. We talked about edit checks. You can always enter a note here on the fly within the survey itself, or you can wait until the end. And if you do get an edit check, then enter a note like in the federal field if it's a federal question. If you want to enter a note here, you can either enter it in the federal field. We usually recommend that if it's a federal question, enter it in the federal field. If it's a state question, you can enter it in the state field here. Local is more just for your convenience here. Say you had a problem getting data and you found somebody at the city clerk's office that was able to get it for you. You might want to enter a local note in here just as a reminder for next year to talk to that same person. Or if you wanted to add additional detail, you can always enter that in a local note. And then previous year, so say it was a common edit check that you get all the time. We have some libraries that get the same edit check every year for whatever reason. You can always look at your previous year here and then copy and paste it into the federal note or the state note, depending on the type of the question. Okay, so let's go ahead and close that. And so a lot of these fields are going to be pre-filled because, like I said, your address typically doesn't change. Your system will be pre-filled with Three Rivers if you're in Three Rivers. If you're in another system, that'll be pre-filled. Census figures, we pull that from the census from the state data center, which is the same. They use the same figures as the 5-year estimates from census, and so we pull those numbers and pre-fill them. If you have questions about those population numbers, you can always email me and I can go back and look at that backend file. You'll notice here that there's a question mark next to some of these questions. You can always click on this and it'll offer more detail. So if you notice here, like for the local population, it indicates that that population estimate is the July 1, 2020 census estimate. So then if we click, and I always recommend people, we've had a few reports of people, when you click on next, Bibliostat is supposed to save this data that's on this page. But I always tell people, because we've had some reports of people that have said that they've done that and their data has not saved. I always tell people just to be on the safe side, click save first and then next. So if you click save, it'll save this page first. Then go ahead and click on next to go to the next page. Just because we've had some reports of that here and there about data not being saved just by clicking the next button. Any questions about that kind of general navigation, or we can move through to some of the specific changes or specific common questions? If you do, just type it in the chat. If there's nothing in the chat, we'll just move right on. You'll notice here, branch libraries. If you have a branch library, this will be pre-filled here. If you have a bookmobile, that'll be pre-filled. If you've added a branch or a bookmobile, we'll need to do things on the back end. To add that branch location, just send the information to me and I can go in as the survey administrator and add that. You'll notice here, some of the questions are drop-down menus. If you just click on the little arrow here, you'll get the drop-down menu. And again, if you want more information, and I'm not sure if you can see the pop-up. I know that we were having problems last year at the training. If you click on the pop-up for is the facility accessible, it gives you a definition and a link to the federal accessibility standards. So if you wanted more detail, you can always click on that little question mark. If you'll notice here in the section 2.10, you'll see here in this description, it says the following questions refer to outlet data and most of these fields cannot be altered. Questions 2.10 through 2.20 and 2.26 through 2.32 are locked. If you need to make a notation, you can do it using the state notepad. What that means is that these fields are, most of you, I don't know if any of you here have a branch location or a bookmobile. If you do, you'll see more than one 2.10 through 2.20 fields. You'll see one for the main central library location, and then you'll see one for the bookmobile or one for the branch. Typically, that only applies to very few libraries that have those. Most of you, I would anticipate that you probably just have the main central library location. So you'll only have one of these groups here for that main central library location. You won't have a separate one for your branch location or bookmobile. So these will all be pre-filled. Now the fields that you do need to pay attention to are 2.22 and 2.23. So this is your hours, public service hours per year. So you would enter your hours, say you were open 10 hours a week, 52 weeks per year. You would just enter 520 there. You just multiply the hours per week times the number of weeks you're open per year. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that you'll notice here it says minor variations in public service hours need not be included, but extensive hours closed to the public due to natural disasters or other events should be excluded from the count. I usually tell people, like, kind of as a general rule, like say your library closed for a couple of days because you had a snowstorm, you wouldn't exclude those hours because that's kind of a minor variation in public service hours. Let's say your library flooded and you were closed for like a couple months, you would exclude those hours because that's more of a extensive closure due to that natural disaster. We could sometimes get questions about whether or not to exclude or include those hours. And then same thing with weeks. So like in this example, if we were open 52 weeks out of the year, we just enter 52 there. I know that some libraries typically are closed 2 weeks a year, say at Christmas time. You know, for them, you just enter a 50 there. We've had questions related to COVID closures. I don't know, that was more of an issue for a lot of libraries last year. If for some reason you were closed, like say you were closed for a month for COVID, you would just enter a 48 here instead of a 52. And for COVID closures, IMLS defines that as if nobody could come into the building, you're considered closed. Even if you offered outside service, curbside service, vestibule pickups, things like that. If the public couldn't come in to the building, they count that as closed. So I know that was a common question for a lot of people last year as to how to count those weeks and hours open. And then you'll notice 2.24, this is the same question that we asked last year about weeks that you were closed due to COVID. And as we mentioned here, the sum of 2.23 weeks open and closed due to COVID should be equal to or less than 52, because you can be closed and open for more than 52 weeks. So if that makes sense. I know we had a lot of questions about that last year too. And then here's that definition about the library building can be closed if the public cannot access it, regardless of staff access, Wi-Fi, virtual, curbside service. So I know that was a question for a lot of people last year. So in this case, if we were closed for 4 weeks, we would just enter 4 there. Anybody have any questions about weeks open, hours open? And then another thing that I forgot to mention, if we scroll back up to the top, you'll notice up here, you see this button here that says show last year's answers. I forgot to mention that at the beginning. I almost always turn this feature on because it's really nice to see how now it shows what was entered last year right here. So it's always nice to know, you know, what you entered last year if there's a large change from what was entered the year before. And you can kind of look at what you entered the year before. And you'll notice that it doesn't appear here. The reason that it doesn't appear here is because this is what it's in, we call a repeating group. It's in a repeating group because some libraries have multiple branch locations or a bookmobile. So they're gonna report these numbers for each branch location and each bookmobile. So that's why it doesn't show up in these particular questions. That's kind of confusing too. And you'll see down here, it says remove group or add group. That would be like, say you added a branch location, you would click on add group, and then all those fields would populate again, and you'd have to enter the data for not only your central library, but your branch location or your bookmobile. And then you'll notice a lot of codes here. There's a legal basis code. These will be pre-filled. They don't change from year to year. Just you can't change them anyway. These are things that MLS reports on their end. Number of central libraries, for most of you, this will be a 1 because you just have the one central library location. And then you'll notice here, this is the total public service hours per year. So this sums all of those, all your outlet files, your central library, and then if you had outlets. In this case, it doesn't pre-populate because we have to click save first. So if we hit save here, it should show up with that 520 that we entered before. Let's scroll down here. Try not to go too fast. And there it is right there. It's 520. So once you hit save, then that'll save your public service hours for every location. If you had a branch or a bookmobile too. And then 2.34, this is another one of those new COVID questions that asks, you know, was your central library or any outlet partially closed due to COVID? And then it offers a further definition here about, you know, people entering the building. If you didn't close, just hit a no. If you did close for a period of time due to COVID, hit yes. That might be the case for a few libraries. Probably not too many. I think some, maybe depending on their fiscal year, they might have had some overlap and they were maybe closed for a certain period of time. But for most libraries, either have a July 1 through June 30th fiscal year or September 1 through October. It probably didn't. I don't think too many libraries were closed at that point in time. It was more last spring.
So Sam, would that include if, say, it's a one-person library and they had COVID or thought they had been in contact and had to close?
Yeah, I think if the library was closed for that reason, yeah, this would be a yes. And then you would exclude the week or 2 weeks that they were, the library was closed. Yeah, that's a good point. If they were quarantining due to COVID. Which is kind of interesting because if they were quarantining due to another reason or illness for another reason, it wouldn't change, you know, so. And I would expect that all of these COVID related questions that are on the survey, I would expect all those to go away next year. I think that was kind of like, and a couple of them did get omitted this year that were on last year's survey. I think because of that overlap in fiscal years and maybe some urban areas that it affected more, IMLS wanted to keep them on just for that 2-year period. And then in section 3, we have the fiscal year. Again, this will be pre-filled based upon what was entered last year. So if your fiscal year last year was October 1 through September 30th, this will be pre-filled with, you know, 1 year in advance. If for some reason your fiscal year changed, which is really rare that it would, let me know and we can make a change to that or enter a note. Just go ahead and make the correction here and enter a note indicating that your fiscal year changed. And then in the revenue part, which is next, the good news is that there are no changes to the revenue part this year on this year's survey. So that's nice to know. So here, this generally is pretty straightforward. I will say a few things like your city village revenue. If you're under a township, you enter the township name here and then the revenue here, the amount here. One thing to point out is that you report the funds that are available to you. So in the revenue section of the survey, you don't necessarily report what you spent. You report, like if your annual budget from the city is $10,000 a year, you would enter a 10,000 here. So generally speaking, in the revenue parts, we'd expect these numbers to be nice round numbers and not like 10/0/11 or something like that. So, you know, you report the funds that are available to you, not necessarily what you spent. So in the expenditures part, that's where you report your what you actually spent. So in the revenue part, funds that are available to you, and then the source of where they came from. So here, if you receive money from the city, here, if it's a township, you would put the township name and then the amount here. If it was multiple townships, we have some libraries that have multiple townships. So let's just enter township 1. I don't know what it's called. Say you got a $500. Oh, only Alpha. Tammy's Township. Something easy. Say we got $500 there. Enter the $500. And say Laura's, I see Laura's pictures up on the right-hand side of my screen here. She must be on the call from Fremont. If we got $500 from Laura, we would just click on this add group button here. And you'll notice here that another 3.4 and 3.5 came up on our screen. So we can enter just Laura's Township. Say Laura's less stingy, she gave us $1,000. So we just enter $1,000 there. And that's how you do that if you get multiple money from multiple sources or any other repeating group throughout the survey. You just click on that add group. And so we enter this in error, we would just, you know, click on remove group to take that out. Okay, and then if you get money from the county, you would enter the county name here and the county revenue amount here. Again, that's an add group, remove group, because we have some libraries that receive money from multiple counties. And then kind of the other government revenue, other local government revenue. This is really rare, but there may be another local government agency that you've received funds from. Just enter the description here and then the amount here. Like say it was a grant from, I don't know, I suppose the NRD or something might be an example of a local government that you received. Just enter that there. Let's go ahead and click next. If anybody's got any questions, feel free to chime in. And then you'll notice here that 3.10 is just the total of everything that we entered there up above. So in our case, it was 10,000 from the city and then 1,000 from Laura and 500 from Tammy's Township. So that totals it at $11,500. And you can kind of look at how that compared to the prior year. That's usually what I do when I look over the surveys. If this is a large change, it maybe sends up a flag. You know, and we want to make sure that we enter a note in the note field, like indicating why it changed. Say you had a huge windfall and you got a bunch more money, you can just enter that in the note saying, we got more money from the county this year, great. If it was less, you could say, well, the county cut our budget by 40% or whatever. And then the next section is the state government revenue. Again, this will be pre-filled if your library is accredited and you receive state aid from us, this will be pre-filled. Or if you are not accredited and you receive dollars for data, it'll be pre-filled with the $200 for the dollars for data. The other grants we don't pre-fill, and the reason why we don't is because the time frames for when those payments are made vary greatly, and sometimes they're reported dependent, and fiscal years vary for libraries too. So we feel like you're in the better position to know when the payment was made, and you would just enter that here if you received a youth grant during this fiscal year, continuing education grant, and then here internship grants here would be entered in the other section. You'll notice that library improvement grants are not listed on here. The reason is because they're entered in the federal section because those are federal grants. We're just basically the pass-through agency for library improvement grants. And then also if you had a CARES Act grant, that's federal dollars as well. And then the ARPA grants that are going on right now, that'll most likely be reported next year. Those are federal grants that just pass through our agency. So those get entered in the federal section. And then you'll see here it totals these amounts. So if we enter the 200 and 0, a 0, and another 200. You'll notice here that that would be the total of 400 for these state grants. If you received money from another state agency other than the Library Commission, from like say another state agency, you would enter that in the 3.14. Again, that's kind of rare. Most of the grants are going to come from us. If you have a question about library improvement grants or any other grant, we have a grants database on our website. You can just type in grants database in the search box, and then it'll show all the grants that were paid. So if you needed more information, maybe about a grant. And then here's that federal library improvement grant here. You would enter that here for federal library improvement grants. And then for the other federal sources, we mentioned CARES Act, ARPA grants. We've added that here. So here, say that was a CARES Act grant. I think we had about 65 of them last year. Some of them were reported on last year's survey because they were paid during the fiscal year. But say you've got one, you would just enter CARES Act here for the description. And then the amount, say it was $200. And say you also received an ARPA grant, you just click on that add group here. And you would enter ARPA. And ARPA is a great big umbrella, so you might want to say ARPA from the city, or ARPA from the Library Commission, or ARPA, whatever, formula grant next year. Whatever it is for the description, and then the amount here. Okay, any
Okay.
questions?
So those who received their ARPA funds from the formula grant prior to September 30th, which is usually the fiscal year, this would be reported on this?
Yeah, if it was received during your fiscal year. So if you received it before, like if say your fiscal year was October 1 through September 30th, and you got it before September 30th, you would report it here. Even though the expenditure might not be reported on this year's survey, if you received the funds here, you would put, ARPA formula grant. Say it was $5,000, you would report that there. Even though you might not have expended it until next year, so the expenditure might be on next year's survey, which might trigger an edit check depending on the amount. And if it does, we can just enter it. You can just enter a note. If it comes up on an edit check, like because the program looks at revenue and expenditures, if for instance you got an edit check because your revenue was way high because of that grant, but your expenditures were low because you hadn't spent any of the money, you can just enter a note later on that says, we got a huge ARPA formula grant that that we didn't expend during the fiscal year. Yeah, that's a good point. Okay. Let's go next here. So then you'll notice the total here. I'm sorry.
Elizabeth had a question. What about a grant from Three Rivers?
Three Rivers Library System.
Right, we give out scholarships for like going to conference and so on.
Right, so that's going to be in the other source. Let's see. It's going to be in the other revenue section here, the one that we just started. So you'll notice here it's in 3.21 regional library system grants. So you just enter that amount there. That's right after the lender compensation part here. So if you receive lender compensation through us, you would enter the total that you receive from us here. If for some reason you had a question about lender comp, those reports are on our website. I think they're reported quarterly. You can just type in lender compensation, and I think it's a spreadsheet. You can then tally it up if you didn't keep track of it locally. So yeah, that would be entered here under regional library system grants, Tammy.
Can you give an example of lender compensation?
So lender compensation typically goes to academic libraries. It's not a program that I manage. Deborah Dragos does. So if you have questions about it, you would direct those to her. But it's my understanding that it's a reimbursement for interlibrary loans, mostly academic libraries. So to encourage to encourage borrowing and lending. So if it was a library that loaned an item, they would get reimbursed, like for postage expenses, for lending that to another library. That maybe the item they might not participate in interlibrary loan. It may be cost prohibitive. So because of the reimbursement, the library is able to loan the items or more items because they get reimbursed for the postage.
And Laura said public libraries get the lender comp too, that we get some every year.
Yeah, there are public libraries on the list too that get it, that are eligible for it. So I'd say if you have questions about that, contact Deborah. She can answer that. And then you'll notice 3.22 and 3.23, that's kind of the other, that's kind of the catch-all. Anything that doesn't fit into these other categories. A lot of the time, these are private grants. Actually, we have this from last year, private grant here. I think another common one, if you click on the question mark, some of the examples that they give are AARP grants. Kreutz-Bennett is another common one. I think those grants are going away though. That would get entered since it's a private foundation, get entered here as the other source. We have some questions about E-rate sometimes. Most libraries just get discounts on their internet through E-rate, but in the rare circumstance that you actually got the money and then passed it on to your ISP, it's really rare that that happens. I think maybe 1 or 2 libraries have it set up that way. You would enter E-rate here, since that's the Universal Service Fund. It's not necessarily, it's a kind of a quasi federal agency. So you don't enter that in the federal part, you enter it here, and then the amount here. Like I said, it's really rare that that occurs. Most of it just comes in the form of a discount. If the funds don't actually pass through, you don't report it. Okay, and then the total here for the other revenue, this just totals everything here. And then you have the total operating revenue, which is from all those sources here, just totals that. Then we have a capital revenue section. I'd say if you have questions about capital projects, there's a description here. Generally, these are one-time major projects. So you added a construction project, added a new building, in addition to a building. You'll notice here that furnishings, equipment, initial purchases are mentioned here. Computer networks, hardware, software. I usually tell people if you're just replacing computers, kind of as say you replace a couple computers in your lab that maybe went out of service, that's typically not a capital project. It comes out of your operating budget. Don't report that in the capital part, report it in the operating expenditures. If it's a major one-time project, say you added onto the library, built a new computer lab, bought all new furniture, new computers to furnish the lab, and the city, allocated, in addition to your operating budget, an extra $20,000 for that project, then that would most likely be a capital project, and you would report the capital revenue here, and then the expenditure later on. So this is just broken down by, like what we had before. Did it come from the local government, state government, federal, or other? So say you had say you installed new windows in the library and had an HVAC system replaced. And the city said, well, we're going to give you $10,000 for that project. You would just report that here like that. And then there was 0 from other sources. You just report the zeros there. These are general major one-time projects. And then we have a non-resident fee section. does your library charge a non-resident fee? Yes or no, and then who's charged. Another thing here, if you notice, we have last year's answer. You can always highlight this and just do a Control-C to copy and a Control-V to paste. So if this didn't change from year to year, you can always copy from last year's answers. And then the amount here.
And Jenny asks, the library revenue is the money available to the library.
I'm sorry, say that again.
So library revenue is money available to the library?
Yes, yeah. So we would typically say, you know, the funds that are available to you, your budget, so to speak. And I realize that kind of can be tricky because at the beginning of the year, you might have, say, a budget of X amount of dollars, and then midway through the year, the city says, you don't have that amount of money. You actually have less or you have more. So that's kind of a judgment call on your end. I would say whatever you had available during the fiscal year. So if that changed during the fiscal year, it might be what you would report. And then for expenditures, we have salaries and wages and employee benefits here. The common question that we usually get with this one, 3.37, for employee benefits, a lot of libraries say, well, I don't have any benefits. You do report what was paid for Social Security and withheld for Social Security and FICA. So, and that includes all withholdings. So sometimes that's paid by the city or the local government. So everything that's withheld here from your check, that could also include medical insurance and things like that. You would include that total amount, so of the withholdings for employee benefits. If you click on this little question mark, it comes up with the federal definition, gives you some other things like, I don't know if you can see it on your screen, but workers' comp, unemployment, tuition reimbursement, housing benefits. If any of that's withheld from your check, you'd report it here. So it's very unusual that this amount of this question would be a zero. I think the only time it would be, there's maybe a handful of libraries that are paid as independent contractors. That's the only circumstance that I know that you wouldn't maybe report benefits withheld. So it's really rare that would be a zero. That usually triggers an edit check. And then you have a series of check marks here. We want to know for the library director only. Is there paid health insurance, life insurance? There's a whole long list of here. We kind of keep track of that on our end. We sometimes get requests from libraries wanting to compare, you know, what benefits are offered in one area to kind of like a comparable library. You know, do you offer paid vacation leave, sick leave, so on and so forth. And I think there's another category here. So if there's something that doesn't fit in this, in any of these boxes up here, just type it in here. Like say you got COVID leave, 5 weeks or whatever, you know, whatever it was, just enter that in the note field there. And then after that, we have collection expenditures. Again, this is the same as last year. None of this has changed. What did you spend on library materials in print format? Again, you can click on the question mark here if you want additional information. And then what did you spend on library materials in electronic format? That would be like your overdrive expenditure. If you also had a database or another electronic collection, say you subscribe to Mango Languages or something like that, and they have an annual fee, you would report that here or add it to it. A lot of people, if they're in the consortium, this number is the same. It's usually $500 if they're in the overdrive consortium. And I know in previous years that always triggered an edit check, and we've now gotten smart and turned that off. So if you enter 500, you won't need to enter a note, because then I'll enter a note later on to that, because that usually will trigger an edit check and it'll say this is the same as last year. Well, the note's always the same too. It's that the overdrive consortium fee hasn't changed from year to year. So Just leave the note field blank. If you want to enter a note, go ahead, but I'll enter a note later on. This edit check should be off. So nothing should come up for you. And then we have the other materials section here. That'll include other audio and video physical units. It's like CDs, DVDs, playaways, any other material in the other section that you spent money on. You would report it there. And then you'll have the total down here, total collection expenditures. If you had other items that circulated, I know some libraries have other things that circulate that might not be CDs and DVDs, like cake pans. You would enter whatever you spend on that here. Puzzles, games. If it circulates and it's part of the collection, it goes in this other category here. If it's for in-house use, it goes in the next section here. If it circulates, it goes up here. I know that can be kind of confusing sometimes. And then we have computer hardware expenditures, accessories and software. So say you spent $1,000 on new computers or software. If you want additional definition, you click on this question mark. This includes items that are purchased or leased and staff and patron use. So if you purchased staff computers, you would report that here in addition to any patron use computers. And then electronic access. What that the most common thing for electronic access here is online OPAC fees. So say you had a subscription to Biblionics or Follett, and there's an annual fee associated with that ILS, you would enter that here for electronic access. That's the common one for that section. And then continuing education, whatever you spend on that. And then the miscellaneous category, we used to have you itemize all these things and then we combined it. So you'll notice that we used to have you itemize facility, like if you pay rent, any facility related expenses, utilities, office supplies, insurance, contracts for services. That would be like if you had a contract for yard maintenance, lawn maintenance, snow removal, stuff like that. You would enter that here in the 3.57. That's kind of a catch-all. Anything that isn't included up there, that's an expenditure. And again, on the expenditures, with the exception of some things like electronic access might be the same from year to year. Most of your expenditures should be kind of like nice or not nice round numbers. It'd be really rare that you spend exactly $1,000 on books, for instance. I would typically look for this number to be like 1,021 or something like that. So we usually tell people, usually if it's a nice round number, you're probably reporting what your budget was and not what you actually spent. So you want to make sure that you report what you actually spent during the fiscal year. And then here, this 3.60, this would be your total capital expenditure. So like we had that revenue section that we just talked about a few minutes ago. Like say you got a new HVAC system, new windows. It's not uncommon to report capital revenue one year and then the expenditures in the following year. So keep that in mind, that if you do get an edit check because maybe this is a 0, just enter a note later on in the note field if you get that edit check and say we received the allocation for the new HVAC project this year, but we haven't started on the renovation until next year or something like that, kind of just to explain why. Okay. Then we go into library collections over here. This is part 4. Is everybody doing okay? Yeah. Okay. All right. Good. No news is good news, huh? You'll notice here that we want to know your library collection. So we started out with books. You'll notice here that last year we had 12,100 books that were held at the end of the year. So that becomes our starting number for this fiscal year. So we start with 12,100. We want to know how many you added during the year here, and then how many you withdrew during the year here. We use that on the accreditation application for weeding percentage. You'll notice that these are in black. So like the feds, IMLS only wants to know how many you held at the end of the current year. They don't want to know how many you added and deleted. But the reason we want to know that is because we look at your weeding percentage when we load it on your accreditation application. And then for ebooks, again, this is kind of a longish definition about, what counts as an ebook. The good news is if you're in the Overdrive Libraries group, this will be pre-filled on your survey. We pre-fill that for you. The only thing that you'll need to add is if you have another consortium. So say you have another vendor besides Overdrive, you would enter that here for your ebooks. And then if you have an Overdrive Advantage or Advantage Plus account and you purchased materials directly, you would enter that here and under 4.7. We don't have those data, so we don't pre-fill that on your end. Then we have audio physical units. These are CDs, basically. Sometimes playaways would get reported here if you have playaways. Audio physical units, again, this starts, with the number from last year, and then you just enter what you added and what you deleted during the year. And then audio downloadable units, again, this kind of mirrors the ebooks part. These are audio books through Overdrive. This will be pre-filled on your survey if you're in the Overdrive consortium. And then again, you'll need to add if you have another vendor or if you purchase library Overdrive Advantage titles, audiobooks, you'll need to enter that. Locally held audio, downloadable audio. And then we have video. So video physical units, these are DVDs. If anybody has VHS, that would be entered here. Probably rare that a lot of people have VHS these days, but there might be some floating around. Yeah, okay. That's where you would report this under the video physical units. Again, this is added, deleted. And then video downloadable. Most libraries don't have video downloadable, but I think some of the vendors are offering this more and more. I know some of the vendors are, I don't know if Overdrive offers video now, if anybody has that through Overdrive. I know Hoopla, another vendor is Canopy, I think, is another vendor that offers video downloadable titles. Kind of the key thing here is if it's held as a part of a consortium, you report it under 4.21. If you purchased it directly, it's a non-consortia held title, it's 4.22, and then 4.23 is the total.
Sam, this is Laura.
Yeah, Laura.
I'm pretty sure Overdrive has video in the consortium. Will that be pre-filled for us?
Is that through Overdrive or is that through the Central Digital Co-op?
No, I'm pretty sure it's through Overdrive now.
I'd have to check with Deborah.
Okay.
Yeah, to find out on that, because
Okay.
I believe she sent me the numbers and I don't think video was included.
Okay, I'll have to look.
So I'll write
Thank
a
you.
note to check with her on that. She's the person that I get the numbers from. So I'll write a note to myself and remember to check with her on that.
Thank you.
Because I know Overdrive absorbed a couple of other like
Yeah, I think
One Click
recorded
Digital
books
and yeah, RB Digital. Let me write a note here.
Thank you.
And usually if some of you are in that Central Digital Co-op, I'm not sure of the status of that. This would be like Zinio. I'm not
That's
sure.
all been absorbed into Overdrive.
Has it all?
as I
Okay, so
understand
that won't be an issue this year. I know that in the past we've gotten those numbers from Jake Rundle, and then when Jake moved to another state, Matt Kovar was able to get those numbers. But if it's all been absorbed, then that'll all be in the Overdrive numbers. So that's one less thing to worry about this year. And then here we have print serial subscriptions. This is this used to be a federal question. It's not a federal question anymore. They dropped it, but we decided that at least at the state level, it's kind of important to keep collecting these numbers. So if you have a subscription to a magazine or a print periodicals, you would report those here. Added during the year, withdrawn during the year. And then we have the other materials. We have some, this is like kind of what we talked about before with the cake pans, other items that circulate to the public. They gave in the old definition here, framed art and sculptures, pamphlets. I think the most common one that I see these days is cake pans. Sometimes there's like kits that get checked out for kids. If it circulates, you would report those here. Yeah, Tammy, did you have a question?
Library of things is a new thing too, which like lawn darts or, outdoor games. Just
Yeah,
things like that.
VR headsets sometimes get checked out, stuff like that. Just basically anything that falls into that other category. You just write a description here in the other section if you wanted to look at what you entered last year.
And in chat, puzzles and Wi-Fi hotspots.
Yeah, that would be it. That would be another. Both those would be other items. So you just enter puzzles, games, hotspots, so on and so forth. I don't believe that there's a limit to the amount of characters that you can enter in 4.28, but if you had a lot of stuff, you could always enter it, and you could just put C note, center it in the note field too. I think we have it set up for a lot of characters, so just keep going with the commas, separated by commas. So like last year in this example, they had 7 cake pans. So you added 2 during the year and withdrew 3, just enter it like that. And then we report, notice this is in purple, so the IMLS wants to know how many other materials were held at just the end of the year. And then you'll notice we got a whole bunch of calculations. So we want to know total materials held at the end of the previous year, total added during the year, withdrawn during the year. Again, this shows your weeding percentage, how many you added. But IMLS only wants to know the total physical items at the end of the year. So kind of this total here. These are all grayed out, they're automatic totals. We usually generally try and have Bibliostat do math for us. If we don't have to do it on our own, the program can do it. That's great. We like that. So then in the library services part, we have a number of registered borrowers. If you'll notice here, you click on the question mark if you have a question about what to report there. There is a field in the note. I don't know if you can see it on your screen. It says files should have been purged within the last 3 years. So IMLS recommends that for your borrowers, that every 3 years you review your records, and if there's inactivity or people are no longer in the community, you would omit them from your total registered borrowers. So they recommend a weeding of every 3 years. And they also define this. Registered borrower is a library user who has applied for and received an authentication number or card from the library and may borrow materials or gain access to other library resources. So that's kind of a definition of what you report here. And then annual library visits. Again, this is people that come in the door. So we had questions about, if somebody comes during COVID and the library is closed during COVID and they have a hold and they pick it up via curbside pickup or a vestibule pickup or outside, that doesn't count as a library visit. It's actually, people actually have to come in the building. And so you'll notice a lot of these numbers will have fluctuated. Like last year, it probably went down because libraries were maybe closed for a month or two during a COVID lockdown. So their visits probably went down last year, probably will go back up this year as libraries have reopened. You would just enter the total amount here, and then you can click on the question mark again, and it'll give you a more detailed explanation. A lot of libraries estimate visits, so they maybe keep track of the total number of people that come in. Some libraries have door counters that keep track of everyone. Other libraries, it's okay to estimate this number based upon an average week. I usually tell libraries, if you're going to take an estimate, try and do it when you don't have like a special event at the library, say when you don't have people on vacation, during bad weather. Try and take it, if possible, during all 4 different seasons, and then average it, because your summer counts may be much larger than your fall counts or winter counts too. But it is okay to estimate that number. And you'll notice here in 5.3, this is a new question. IMLS wants to know, for the number that you do enter, they want to know, is it an actual count or is it an estimate? So say you did provide an estimate, you just click on that for an estimate. And then reference transactions, we get some questions about reference transactions, what is and what isn't. I know that's kind of a tricky thing to answer sometimes. And I imagine, yep, if you click on this question mark, you get this great big, huge, long definition here about what to count, what not to count. I usually tell people kind of a common thing. I'm sure Tammy probably gets this question too, about what counts as a reference transaction. Kind of the, I guess the highlight here is you don't count what we call directional transactions, which is if somebody comes into the library and they say, what time do you close? Or where's the restroom? Stuff like that is more of a direct, where are the nonfiction books? That's more of a directional transaction. But say somebody came in and they said, like say they came into the Fremont Library and said, Laura, I'm writing a book report on squids. Can you help me find some resources on squids? And Laura went out and showed me some books or reference materials on squids, or how to find some information from a database that was at the Fremont Library. That's what we would count as a reference transaction. It's kind of the librarian is using their professional knowledge or skill to recommend or resources to a patron to use. This could also be like computer help. Say somebody needed help on how to use a computer. During the course of a transaction with one patron, it might count as 2 reference transactions, or 3 or multiple, because your initial question might be the report on the squids, and that may lead to something else, like other resources in the library. So if it's on more than one topic, it may count as more than 1 reference transaction. And you count transactions in person via the telephone. Say somebody called on the telephone and they asked a question on the telephone. If a question came over email or a chat or text message, you count those as well. So it's not dependent on the format. And we realize this is really a judgment call, kind of on your end. You can go through here, and it does give you some examples of what to count, what not to count. And again, you can estimate this number, so you can keep track based upon an average week, like you did the library visits. Say you did that, you would enter it here under 5.5. Yeah, we counted everything, or no, we estimated it based upon a typical or average week. And then annual uses of public internet computers. So these are the hardwired computers that you have in the library, or if you had a device, say you had a Chromebook or a tablet that didn't circulate from outside the library, it was just in-house use. You report those uses here. Under uses of public internet computers, you don't report staff computer use, just public internet computer use. So say you had 1,000 sessions or 1,250 sessions during the fiscal year, you would report that here. And then again, they ask the typical follow-up question, is that based upon an estimate or an actual count? So you could estimate this number based upon an average week. Just report here to MLS that's based upon an estimate or an annual count. You'll see that for a lot of questions. They want to know, you know, if libraries are estimating those numbers or if they're actually counting them. And then you'll notice here in 5.8, you have circulation of adult materials. That can be tricky too, because, you know, some materials cross over. They don't have an intended audience. They have a general interest intended audience. I usually tell people, you know, however it's cataloged, if it's cataloged as a children's item, enter that as a children's circulation. If it's an adult item, enter it as an adult. The catch-all for things that kind of cross over, I think, are adult. Most libraries enter those as adult item. That can be tricky sometimes. So you have adult materials here. This would be any material that's not downloadable. So basically everything besides OverDrive. So books, CDs, video, cake pans, and those other things that we talked about that circulate. If it's an adult audience, you report the circulation here. And then 5.9 is the OverDrive circulations. Again, this will be pre-filled for OverDrive. We pull those numbers and pre-fill them for you. If you have another vendor, you'll have to add to that number. So say you had a different vendor with ebooks, you would add that number to the OverDrive number. And then you have a couple totals, and then you have the children's materials. So you report the children's materials here. This should mirror the adult. And then children's downloadable in 5.2 or 5.12. Again, that'll be pre-filled with your OverDrive number. It looks like we got an error here under 5.14. We have a Bibliostat needs to check that. That's good that we uncovered that. We'll report that to them before our survey launches. It's that should be in purple. That would be the total annual circulation of other physical items. And then a lot of these are just totals. So report to MLS, total physical item circulation, use of electronic materials. That's those two OverDrives, the adult OverDrive circulations and the children's OverDrive circulations here. And then total circulation of library materials here. And notice that this excludes database. And actually the federal definition calls these electronic collections. Whenever you see the term electronic collections, that's what they refer to it on the national level. Most people, we always put in parentheses databases because I think that's what most people, it makes sense to most people, databases than electronic collections. I think that terminology can be confusing, but that's what it says in the federal definition. So that's why we use both. So these are databases that you would fund locally. So again, like Mango Languages, Chilton's auto repair manuals, if you subscribe to that. I'm trying to think of other databases, EBSCO, some might have some.
Ancestry.com.
Yeah, anything like that. You would just report the total number. So say you had 3 local databases here, you just reported 3. And then we used to have you itemize all 3 of those. We don't do that anymore. You'll notice here there's a note in red. So we just want to know, you know, what those databases are. So say it was Mango, and then EBSCO, whatever it is that you subscribe to locally, just separate the names by a comma. And then, and you can always copy and paste from the year before if that didn't change here. And then we want to know how many times those databases are used throughout the year. If you have that from your vendor, enter it in 5.20. I know sometimes those numbers can be kind of hard to get from vendors. They call it successful retrieval of electronic information. So that's the total of all these database uses here. And if you have a question about what qualifies as a use, or have a question about your report from your vendor, which number to use. I know that sometimes those have multiple columns and can be difficult to decipher. This question mark will kind of give you some more information about, what qualifies to report. And then 5.21, this is Nebraska Access. This will be pre-filled with 26. We now have 26 databases through Nebraska Access. So just, that'll be pre-filled for you. And then you'll have the totals here, total databases, that's your local databases plus Nebraska Access. And then electronic content use, that's a federal question. That'll be your total database use plus your overdrive. And then total collection use, this is like a combination of your database use, electronic material use, and then physical material use. And these will automatically total for you. You don't need to do that on your end. And then we have interlibrary loan. So there's two questions about interlibrary loan: total materials that you loaned to other libraries, and total materials that you borrowed from other libraries. And it's kind of a common question here is book club kits. If you borrow book club kits from us or the systems, that counts as an interlibrary loan. That's a common question. You count the total number of items in the kit. So if it's 10 items, 10 books in the kit, that's 10 interlibrary loans. So it's even though it's the same title, you count the number of items. So make sure that that you're counting those there. And then if you loaned any materials to other item and any of the libraries, you'd enter that there. If you didn't, you just enter a 0. And then Nebraska card registrations. If you participate in that program, that's a reciprocal lending program through us. You would just enter, yeah, we had 5 people that had a Nebraska card, or we issued 5 cards during the fiscal year. And then we've added a new question. We've had libraries kind of that wanted to report, libraries that were Overdrive Advantage members, but had shared, I guess I should say Advantage, I think it's called Advantage Plus, members that have shared their titles back. They purchased titles and then shared them back with the consortium, the statewide consortium, and they wanted to report that. So they don't report that on the survey. So we've added these 2 questions to capture that. If you are an Overdrive Advantage member, do you share your titles through the Advantage Plus option with the consortium? So that's a yes, no, or NA if you didn't participate. And then if you want to report the number of times those were used, you can report it here. That's kind of to give you credit for doing that, because that's something that you don't need to do. And we want to give you credit for that. So if we know that libraries are doing that, that's great. And then
Sam, is it better to put a 0 or an NA rather than leave something blank?
Yeah, put a 0, and then on the drop-down menu, I think there was a yes, no, and then an NA. So say you didn't have Overdrive, that's an NA, and then it's a 0. A lot of questions on the survey, I think you should be able to enter an NA on basically anything. I'll do that when I look at your survey at the end. If for some reason like county revenue is blank, I'll put an NA and a 0, just to make sure it's nice and clean. So if you notice, a lot of you should have gotten an email from me about programs. We have a lot of programs changes. These are national changes to the survey. So we have one whole page of all these changes here, and this is the new definition. I think I find it easier if we go through the survey itself. I would maybe recommend that you take the time to go through this. It used to be that we just had the general categories of children's, young adult, and adult. Now we've got a lot of different new categories. And if for some reason you're having problems collecting the data or you don't have it, we can work with you on that. These are new questions this year. So it's understandable that you might not have these numbers, what IMLS is asking for. So this is the new definition. I thought it was important just to put everything all on one page. We also have these definitions in the survey itself on the little question mark button. But say you want to read through everything all at once, it's right here. So I'm going to go ahead and click on next and get you to those questions. And if you have questions about individual questions, let me know. And we'll get to those as we go through it. So basically what we have on these new questions is we have a breakdown of categories into live programs, virtual programs. These would be like live streamed programs. So virtual program is not a recorded program. This would be like if you had story time and you broadcasted it live on Facebook Live or some other vendor, some other format. That would be like a virtual program. And then we have on-site programs. These are programs held in the library itself or on the library grounds. So like say outside, but on the library grounds. And then off-site programs. These would be like a program that would take place maybe at a farmer's market or at a nursing home or daycare center, something like that would be an off-site program. So we want to know the total. The first question is the total number of programs that the library offered in any of these categories. If they were live in the library grounds program or virtual programs. Sometimes these could be hybrid programs. These might be a story time where you had live attendees and also a live stream to virtual attendees. These are programs targeted, so the target audience is 0 to 5. Okay, so say you offered 30 of those programs during the reporting period or the fiscal year, you would just enter a 30 there for those programs targeted to age 0 through 5. Okay,
Yeah,
Tammy?
there's a couple of questions because
Yep.
our rural area, our summer reading program is for preschool through 12. So do we count that program in each group? And
Yeah,
Angela Scribner said too that don't separate the ages, it just goes on.
Right. So it's going to be a judgment call on your end. I would say, who is your primary targeted audience? Is it 0 through 5 or is it 6 through 11? Because these are the categories that we have to try and get things to fit into. So, in those examples, it probably is going to go into age 0 through 5 because that might be your targeted audience.
So if they have 20 programs and it's for all of them, can they do like 10 and 10?
I'm sorry, ask that again.
Say they do have a program and it's just for all ages.
Yeah.
And 20 programs, can they just put 10 in each group?
Right. So that's the good thing about these changes. And we'll get to that in a minute, because I think we'll answer your question in a minute in one of these other categories here. So because now we have a general interest category. And I think what you're describing is maybe intergenerational programs or like a general interest program or a family program. We now have a category to report those programs. And we'll get to that in a second. Okay, so 5.31 is, these same programs are targeted to age 6 through 11, okay? And the other thing with programs is like, say you had a recurring program, say you had story time once a week, and it was the same program every week. So every time that you have that program, that counts as one program. So even though it's the same program, say you offered it 52 weeks out of the year, but it was story time once a week, that would count as 52 programs in this number. So that's another thing to keep in mind. So then you had your total children's programs here. And then we have this 12 through 11 category. So that's kind of what used to be the young adult category. Then we have the age 19 plus category. This is the adult category. And here's where we have that general interest category. So if you had an intergenerational program, if I understand that's maybe what you're describing, you could report that here. And in the definition, if we pull that up, IMLS has included, certain examples. These types of programs include or may include family game nights, holiday events, storytelling programs, chess clubs, like intergenerational things. They wanted to capture this because this was, people were complaining, especially at the national level, and saying, our programs, don't really have a targeted audience. They're kind of targeted towards families, or they're targeted towards intergenerational things, or they have a general interest component. There may be coding clubs that target, a wide range of individuals. So that's kind of what you would then choose to report in this general interest. Does that answer the question? Okay. So that's this kind of catch-all that we have here now.
Okay. Rose asked, since this changed mid-year, how do we handle the beginning of the year? Estimates?
Yeah, I would say do the best you can. If it fits into one of these categories, if your targeted audience was one of these groups, go ahead and report that as best you can. We expect, whenever we have a set of new questions from IMLS, basically the first 2 years, we don't pay much attention to the data. We would pay attention to the totals, which aren't going to change. These we could compare, like for instance, the number of children's programs. This was a question that was reported last year and the year before. We could look at this and compare it, year by year. But for these new questions, we usually say it takes a good 2 years to get solid data that we could then look at. So yeah, do the best you can if it changed mid-year. And you may not have it. You may not have those numbers. And if for some reason you have the total, but you don't have the breakdown, you can always send me an email. We could, theoretically enter a code for, data not collected for these. And as a survey administrator, I could enter, a number for 5.36 here. So that's always an option. We try not to do it if we don't have to, but sometimes we do. We just don't have it. So those are kind of the general program numbers up here. And we talked about live, virtual, on-site, and off-site. That includes everything. So then here, the follow-up questions are, of the total programs, here in 5.36, this is for all age groups, how many were held on-site? So how many programs did you have? This would be all ages and the general interest category. How many were held on-site? Meaning in the library or on the library grounds. We'd enter that number here. So this number can't be larger than the total program number. And then we also want to know how many were held off-site. And then how many were live virtual programs. Okay. So then the obvious question is, if you have story time and you have live attendees and virtual attendees, where do you report it? Do you report it under 5.39 or do you report it under 5.37? And up here, you'll notice it says for hybrid programs held both on-site in the library building and broadcast live virtually, report only in the on-site category. Okay, so if you had a story time that you also had a video camera and you had virtual attendees, you would report it in the on-site category and not in the virtual category. You don't double report it. Okay, does that make sense? Okay. And then we have program attendance. So this is all of our programs that were recorded up here. Then we want to know how many attendees there are. And if you remember from last year, those of you who have been around last year, the key component of attendance is you count everybody in attendance regardless of age. So if you have a story time that you reported as a program that the targeted audience was toddlers, age 0 through 5 or pre-K, and you had adults that attended, you report everybody that was in attendance, regardless of their age. So if you have 20 preschoolers and 20 adults that were in attendance at that program, the program attendance is 40 total. Or say you had a brother or sister of one of the pre-K kids, you report that person, everybody that was in attendance. Okay. And so for program attendance, here you'll notice in the note field it says you do not include views of program recordings, only live attendance. Okay. So this is program attendance targeted to age 0 through 5. Okay. You report the total number of people in attendance for that live live or virtual program, on-site, off-site, whatever. This is the total program attendance for those programs that were reported in age 0 through 5. And then we have the other categories, 6 through 11. And then this total is just the children's. I think that the reason that they included it like this was, I think that this was always reported this way, and they wanted to capture this data for one more year, which is the total children's attendance. So that's why we have this total here for children. I think eventually this will go away and you'll have these categories. So you have the 0 through 5, 6 through 11, 12 through 18, and 19 plus, and then the general interest. But for one more year, and this will be, they'll report the total children's attendance. And then you have your general interest here, like we talked about, and then the total program attendance. This is the total of everything. Okay. Does that make sense? Sort of. Here, for the following questions, report program attendance once. For hybrid programs held both on-site in the library building and broadcast virtually, report live attendees in 5.47 or 5.48, on-site or off-site, and virtual attendees. Okay, so basically the way to look at this is these questions that start with 5.47 are a subset of the total attendance. Okay, so this is by total attendance by age group and general interest. And what we want to know here is out of the total program attendees, which is here, all of those age groups combined, we want to know how many of those were on-site attendees, okay, all ages, all groups, how many were off-site attendees for off-site programs, and how many were virtual attendees, okay? So these are virtual attendees for live programs, okay? And I think the key component for virtual attendees, let's see here. I know this was a question that came up nationally. Let me make sure that I understand the definition correctly here. Each attendee should be counted in the format category in which they attended or viewed the program session. Okay, so in other words, if you had 5 live attendees that were on site, you know, they viewed the story time live, you would count those in the on-site category. If they attended live via Facebook Live, you would report them in that category, or YouTube or similar platform. It does say to count peak concurrent viewers here. And I know that if you have questions about that, I know that there's some documentation that's been put out nationally about how to find those data from like Facebook Live or YouTube. If you have questions, I can probably track that down for you. And I think what they're getting at here with the peak concurrent viewers is that people may drop in for the beginning of the program and then they might drop out. And so, you know, is that counted as, you know, a view? It may be hard to get those numbers. Sometimes it's easier for people if they have a registration, you know, they know, you know, if they have a registration thing or like a splash type page, they can get that from that type thing, from the registration links. Let's see. So then we have recorded program presentations. And this is kind of confusing. So what this means is so we talked about those hybrid programs where you have a live component and a virtual component, like a story time that has a live attendance and then gets broadcast, maybe via Facebook Live. What recorded program presentations are is these are things that are recorded ahead of time and then maybe posted on your website or posted on your YouTube channel. So if you notice here, if you read this part that I highlighted, a recorded program presentation is any recording of a program content that cannot be viewed live as it unfolds. So something that you record and then it's available for viewing later on. Okay. So if you had X number of those, you would report those in the 5.50. And then the number of views would get reported here. And the thing to keep in mind here is that the IMLS definition says to report the views within 7 days after the presentation was posted. Okay. And I think that raised a lot of questions. So it's like, why aren't we reporting all the views within the reporting period or the fiscal year? And the answer from IMLS was that program presentations might get posted at any time during the fiscal year. And the intent to capture this was to try and take a snapshot of the number of views of those of those presentations within 7 days was like a snapshot that they wanted to take. And so because we can't change the definition because it's a federal definition, we've added this one, which allows you to report the total number of views within the fiscal year. And so that's a question that we figured it makes sense for libraries to report that. So we just went ahead and added it as a state question. It's possible that that could be added later on as a federal question, but for now, if you know the number of views of those recorded sessions for your entire fiscal year, you can report that here in the 5.52. But the federal question says to just report it within 7 days. So that's one thing to keep in mind. And I realize with these questions being new that a lot of you are going to have questions maybe as you get ready to report them on your survey. This is a lot of new stuff here. Feel free to email me or give me a call. It may be something that we haven't thought of on our end or they haven't thought of on their end. And I can always ask for clarification.
There is a question in chat, Sam. Diane asked, my library is connected to the community room. If we use the community room, is that on-site or off-site?
So the community, if it's not a program that's sponsored, if it's just community room use, like say an outside entity comes in and uses the community, you don't report that as a program at all. You only report it if the library sponsors the program. I've had some questions, like if they have a, if an outside group comes in, there was a question, it was nationally. So they were doing health monitoring in the library. So the local health department was coming in and they were doing like a blood drive or blood pressure monitoring or something like that. If the library is not a sponsor, if they just allow this outside organization to come in and use the meeting room for that purpose, you don't report that in the programs at all. You only report it if the library sponsored the program and was involved in it in that way. So and I think that sounds like what Diane is reporting as just meeting room use, which is something that we've talked about putting on our survey. Other states collect that. So at some point, I think we might think about adding that meeting room use as a question. Or is that something else that she's describing?
Well, I think a lot of people really are cautious for social distance. So if you have too big of a group for the library, a community room may be bigger. So what if you have a huge turnout and they move it to the community room? That's the library program, but is it on site since it's connected?
So like a community center that's outside the library? Yeah, so that program would then be an offsite program. Yeah.
But it says it's connected to the library.
Well, if it's connected to the library, it would be an on-site program, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And yeah, I guess one by one, case by case you can be asked as the time.
Yeah, because I'm sure that as you get into this and you start entering things, we tried to design the survey, because we're dealing with these purple questions. So if you notice, we tried to do it in a way that, because I considered doing it, looking at these age groups 0 through 5, and then asking how many were on site, how many were off site, how many were live virtual, and we're looking at it from the standpoint of survey burden too. And this was like the survey design that seemed to make the most sense to us, without adding a ton of questions. Granted, the new questions there's a ton of them already. When you have all these different age categories, and then you're talking about on-site, live on-site, virtual on-site, and then hybrid components too. So we try to do it in the best way we can. And if you get into it and you have suggestions, I am more than willing to listen to you. If you notice something that might be easier to do next year, please let me know, because we try to do it in a way that was the least burdensome to you. But they're national data elements that we're going to have to ask. So we thought, the earlier we can get them on the survey, the better. So another thing that we've added this year, this is from the state level. This is a question that we often get about what we call drop-in activities or passive activities. We have a lot of libraries that want to report these, and it doesn't really fit the program, the national program definition. And so we added this to our survey. There was proposals to add this as a national question, but unfortunately they failed at the national level to get voted in. So we've went ahead and decided to add this as a state question. So we want to know, does your library offer these drop-in or passive activities? We've given you some examples. Actually, I think what I did was Wisconsin had been asking this question, and so I ripped off their definition. If you have other things that maybe fit as examples and want to forward those, we could definitely add those to this definitional part here. But generally, these would be like a drop-in activity, a DIY station in the library, 1,000 books before kindergarten, frequent reader clubs, take and make kits, this type of thing that is maybe a passive activity that doesn't necessarily fit the definition of a program. You can report those here into this 5.53 on the survey, or 5.54 depending on the age category. So, and again, you count all activities if they're held on or off site, if the library sponsors or co-sponsors. It doesn't include one-to-one homework help. I think you'd probably count that maybe as a reference transaction, but don't count that here. So then we have the age categories. As the target audience age 11 and younger, you would report the number of activities here. Young
Like
adult.
Like a
Yep.
Steam cart?
Like a what?
Steam cart?
Steam cart?
Yeah,
So is that like you put a cart out with items on it and people can come and take them?
probably use them within the library, I think, right, Jenny?
Yeah, right. Yeah, I think that would count as a self-directed activity. Sometimes people put like coloring sheets out in a children's area. That would be like a passive type activity. And then 5.5 is the adult general interest. That's kind of this catch-all here. Most of those I think are geared towards children. So it would probably be in 5.53 or 5.54. But you might have some that are not. So those would go on to 5.55. And then we want to know if you have a summer reading program. These are the same questions as last year. Do you have summer reading for children? These are just yes, no. And then young adults, this would be, age 12 through 18. And then adults. And then you'll notice here we have the public services during COVID. These are going to be the same as last year. If you were closed, did you provide services. You know, if people couldn't come into the library, did you answer the phone, provide services, reference service of the phone, curbside, pickup, that type of thing. You just enter a yes or no. Now, the key thing here is if your library didn't close due to COVID during this reporting period or this fiscal year, you would just enter a no here, and you can enter a note here saying we weren't closed, you know, during this fiscal year. So that was a question that we had last year. A lot of libraries said we weren't closed. Well, then you enter a no here and a note that says we weren't closed. And then, you know, during COVID, I guess technically this would be even the case today. Do you allow registration for library cards online? You know, yes or no. Sometimes people can call into the library or they have an online library card that they can apply for. A lot of the time that would relate to, say, Overdrive. If they wanted to use Overdrive and they didn't have a library card, they might be able to do it remotely or over the phone. Did the library provide reference services via the internet or telephone when the library was physically closed? Again, if you didn't close, just enter no. You can enter a note that says didn't close, or just no is fine. Did you provide outside circulation service, curbside pickups, vestibule pickups? Yes or no. Did you intentionally provide Wi-Fi access outside the library? Yes or no. Did you increase your access to the Wi-Fi? So like during this reporting period, did you add another access point that extended to the outdoor area of the library? And then, you know, was staff reassigned? I think for most people, this was a no. I think I maybe had a handful of libraries last year, but most libraries, even if they were closed, they just continued to work in the library on other projects. So most of the time, it's going to be a no for most people. Okay. And I think we're getting close to the end here. I notice we're close to the end of the time. Automation system, we want to know, you know, do you still have Biblionics? A lot of the time that data is helpful to collect, because if you're looking at getting a new ILS, you can then look at what was reported in other libraries and then contact them. You know, do you like Biblionics, or, you know, what are complaints that you have about it? You know, we're thinking about purchasing it. Do you provide public internet access? You know, how many internet computers are used by the public? Again, you know, this would include, you know, as libraries now offer, say, Chromebooks or tablets for use within the library, these are still library computers. You just don't report the ones that circulate. These are internet computers that are used by the public within the library itself. So the traditional computer lab, and then any laptops or Chromebooks or tablets that are internet connected. If you had just an OPAC computer that's not connected to the internet, just has a local shelf list, you don't report that here. If it's just an OPAC computer, doesn't have otherwise access to the internet. Do you filter? If you filter for SIPA, like if you receive E-rate, we want to know what kind of software you use. Again, that's, you know, for the purpose of, you know, if one library is looking at a filtering software, they can see what other libraries have and then, you know, contact them. You know, who's your ISP? Is it CenturyLink? Whatever it is. Who provides the internet service for your library? And then the type of connection. You know, do you have a fiber connection? Is it DSL? If it's something other, you could enter a note. This covers, I think, the major categories. We had dial-up on there last year. I hope nobody's on dial-up anymore. Do you offer Wi-Fi, you know, within your library? Yes or no? And then we have a couple of new federal questions here. This is an old question. This was always on our survey about the Wi-Fi sessions. They changed the definition though this year. You'll notice we put this in this note. So if you do not collect the data with hardware logs, network scanning, or other software, okay, you enter an NA here. So what that means is that we had libraries, a lot of them that reported observation estimates. They kind of had an idea about how many people per day use their Wi-Fi, and they were entering a number here. If that's the way that you collect this data, from now on, you enter an NA. They want it to be more detailed. So you have to collect it with a hardware log, network scanning, or other software, or like say your ISP might collect that at their end. If you have it from your ISP or your router, or have, something like that. I think the reason for this is they wanted to capture the people that were using the Wi-Fi. They wanted this number to be more accurate. If it's not accurate, then you enter the NA. Although the obvious question is, why don't we do that from the get-go? We've already been collecting this for 5 years. So if you entered a number last year based on an observation estimate, you would enter an NA this year. If you have questions about that, just let me know. And then here they want to know, is it an actual count or an estimate? That's kind of like what their pattern is for the other stuff. And then we want to know at the state level, what your maximum download speed is. And we've included a link here, you'll notice here, to a speed test, which is something new this year. This is the website or the company that the state OCIO recommends for speed tests. If you want to click on that and run a speed test, sometimes that's not a bad idea. Say your ISP claims that you should be getting 100 megabit download speed. That's what maybe you're paying for. Go ahead and do a speed test. You might not be getting that amount of speed, and maybe that's time to contact them and find out, if you need to upgrade your router or other equipment, or if there's some other issue going on where you're not getting the speed that you're supposed to. And then just report the range here. Like, so in this case, if it's still 18 to 24, you can just report that here. And then, does your library have a makerspace? We have a kind of a definition here about what a makerspace is. Often focuses on these areas. You have a dedicated space. Yes, we have a permanently allocated makerspace. Yes, we have a temporary shared space. That would be like if you had a meeting room. Say you had a makerspace items in the closet, but the meeting room functioned for other events, and the makerspace items were wheeled out, once a week for programs or whatever. Then that would be like a temporary or shared space, or you don't have a space at all within the library. And these questions are the same as last year, so this would be the same as what you entered before. Virtual visitors to your website. The good news here is if your library website's hosted by us at the commission, this will be pre-filled. If you have another, if it's hosted by the city and you have that number, enter it. If it's not available, just enter a 0. This is a IMLS question. I'd like to see it go away. I don't know if it's really important. I've never had anybody ask for it. I think the intent was to show that, people are seeking library services virtually, but I'm not sure that a website visit necessarily captures that well. And then we want to know for the makerspace technologies, do you have these things? This is simple yes or no. Do you have a 3D printer, scanner, laser cutter? These categories are the same as last year. AWE stations, so on and so forth. And then 6.14 is the follow-up question. We want to know if you have a 3D printer or any of those things that are mentioned up here. Do you offer any technology training on those topics, or programs? Yeah, you offer weekly laser cutter class, or something. Just enter yes here. Formal training or informal one-on-one training, or no, we don't offer any training. And I think if you enter a no up here, this stuff disappears down here. I think the logic is set up for that. So that's that. And then let's go to the next question. So in 6.15 is, does your library offer digital literacy training on any of these topics? Our technology librarian wants to know these things. This hasn't changed from last year. And then again, this is yes, formal, informal training, or no on these particular topics. And so I think we're getting close to the end. So FTEs, this hasn't changed either. The key thing here is you enter the number of people. So in here, if you had 20 librarians that are paid staff, there are 20 here. Or like last year, if it was still 3, you would enter 3 there. And say those 3 people were all full-time, they worked 40 hours a week. You would enter the total number of hours per week here, so that would be 120. 40 times 3 is 120. And then this will automatically calculate the full-time equivalents. So that's just the total number of hours divided by 40. So we have the Biblstat do the math for us again. And then the follow-up question is, out of those 3 people that you reported as librarians, do any of them have an MLS degree from an ALA accredited institution? And if it's a 0, you enter a 0. If yes, one of them has their master's degree in library science, you would enter a 1 here. And then you would enter the number of hours that that person works. So here, if it's 40 hours, that's 1 FTE. If it's 20 hours, that's a half of an FTE here, okay? And then in 7.7, that's kind of the catch-all, that's non-librarian paid staff. This would include custodial staff, if you had an accountant on staff, anybody else that doesn't do librarian work, business office sometimes. Those would get counted under the 7.7 as other paid staff. And then just the hours here. I usually tell people that even if, don't try not to look at job titles, but look at what the responsibilities of people are. Like if you had somebody that technically their job title was library technician or something like that, but they frequently worked the reference desk or the circulation desk, I would count them as a librarian. I think that's what they're after here. I would consider that library work or librarian work. Someone want to know here, the job title of the person that's the library director. Usually this is going to be director or library director. The hourly wage of just the library director. Report that there. Again, that's for, if people are looking at salary survey information, they want to know maybe what library directors in nearby communities make. Total number of volunteers, and then the estimate of the hours that they work per week. That can vary year by year if you have more in the summer for summer reading and less in the winter for other activities. Just kind of the average. These are state questions. So it's not like they're federally required questions. And then the narrative section, a lot of people copy and paste this out of their annual report. We kind of just want to know what did you do over the year? What major successes or challenges did you have? So that we can maybe look at that and on our end for planning purposes. You don't have to put anything here if you don't want to. You can just leave it blank. It's not a required question. And then in the certification section, you just enter the name of the person that filled out the that did the survey. Most of the time, this is going to be the library director. Occasionally, it might be a board member. We have some libraries that their board member fills out the survey. And then the title, that person, library director, board president, whatnot. And then the date. And then to submit the survey, it tells us, here, there's some steps. Verify that all the questions have been answered. Review your flagged questions. Check your edit checks. Go back and look at the status. And then you're ready to submit the survey. The thing is that you can't submit the survey if you have required unanswered questions or edit checks. So I always tell people when you get done with the survey, go over here to the status, click on the show status button. And it's going to come up with a lot of stuff because we've just been playing around with this today. So you'll see here, here's your edit checks, your unanswered questions, and your flagged questions. So you can click on any of these things. Here it shows we don't have any flagged questions. We probably got a ton of unanswered questions. There's a bunch of required unanswered questions. You can also look at all unanswered questions. So these would be the state and federal ones. And then the edit checks over here. If it comes up there. So this kind of tells you what the edit check is, and it wants more information about it. So like here, if you'll notice here, because population wasn't pre-filled, it tells us, population should be, more than 0. And so it wants to know why. So you could enter an answer here on those questions on the fly if, that was entered incorrectly. Or you can enter a note explaining why it's outside of that range. So like this is a good example. It's like this actually looked at this edit check here, looked at the total operating revenue and the total operating expenditures. And it's saying this is higher or lower than expected. Okay, so it's probably looking at this and saying, since we didn't really enter that much in expenditures, it's saying, well, you reported $17,000 in revenue, but like not very much in expenditures. So you can enter a note here if you'd like. You don't have to go back to the survey itself. You could enter a note that just says, we didn't spend this fiscal year. You can enter a note here, and I'm going to scroll down way to the bottom and click on save real fast here. You'll notice here, you would enter a note for all these edit checks and then click on save. And then if we go all the way back up, sorry for the speed, you'll see how this text is now in green and not red anymore. That means you've satisfied that edit check. So you've entered a note explaining why it's outside of that range. So you'll need to do that for all of these questions to pass these edit checks before you can submit your survey. Okay. So these are maybe questions that you need to go back and look over, and then you'll want to check and see if you have any required unanswered questions to provide answers to, and then you can submit your survey. And so once your survey has been submitted, if you click on submit here, if you're all ready to go, you got all your edit checks taken care of and your unanswered questions and your flagged questions. You can then go ahead and click on submit. And assuming all those things are taken care of, once you submit, it's a two-part process. You first click on submit, and this says, well, you got some problems here. So if these were all green, there would be a button down here at the bottom that says submit, and you would then submit again. You would click on submit twice. It's a two-part process. And then you would get a little pop-up box that says your survey has been successfully submitted. Once that occurs, the program will automatically send me an email, and I usually I always go back and look through your survey. And if I have questions on my end, maybe common things that came up, I would contact you usually via email and say, hey, I have a question about this question or that question, kind of in the follow-up stage. If there's no questions, I'll usually send you a link to our supplemental survey, and we usually like to have you look at that once a year and go through that and make sure that your information is updated. The supplemental survey is kind of what we use on our end, just to make sure that we know who your current board members are, what your hours are. I think there's a couple of technology related questions in there, friends, foundation groups, stuff like that. We like to have you do that at least once a year. Another thing that I forgot to mention at the beginning is, so recommended browser for Bibliostat is Chrome. That's the browser that they recommend. It's also approved for Firefox and I think maybe Safari. But Chrome is definitely the recommended browser. It doesn't play well with it, play nice with IE or Edge, so we don't recommend those two. So if you have questions about browsers, we can forward those on as well. Any questions? I think that kind of covers most of it. I know I was going kind of fast. I know the program section is where we're probably going to get questions. Those are anticipated.
Well, nothing's coming up in chat,
Wow.
but yes, it'll be different when there's actual information to plug in, then it's a
I
reality.
think, yeah, as you get into the survey, you might think of questions that come up. You can always email me or give me a call. If I'm not in the office, I have voicemail to email. So just leave a short message and I can call you back. The other thing is I can log into your survey on my end and look at everything you're looking at. There may be questions that are locked that I have access to. So if it's something that's locked, let me know. The other thing that you can do is you can always print surveys here, like I said at the outset. We also keep a copy locally if we need to pull your prior year survey, or if you want to look at it. If you want a copy and are having problems printing it, just let me know. We usually print them in a format so that we print the survey itself and then we print your notes at the end. So we kind of know what notes you've entered before. We're expecting to launch on the 15th of November. It was the 8th of November, but then I realized that I'm going to be gone that week on vacation. So I thought it would be better to not have to worry about it when I'm on vacation. Plus, that's Veterans Day week. It's on the 11th, so that's a holiday. So we pushed it back to the 15th. I think technically it probably will be unlocked and ready on the 12th, the Friday before.
And you know, everybody will start it on that day too then.
We have a few like overachievers usually every year that do it like on the first day, but most people it's after January, when they start. They'll start maybe entering their data in the fall, and then the January they kind of wrap it up. Well, that depends on your fiscal year too. You might be still trying to get reports. And we have a few libraries that have calendar year, fiscal year, so they can't start it until January 1st because they're still collecting data, throughout the calendar year. So there's also a help screen here. If you're having a bibliostat issue, if you'll notice up here, there's this help screen. I think with, oh no, it's under the contact button. So there's a contact button here with an 800 number that you can call that goes to our bibliostat rep. You can also email me and I can forward that email to them. Just keep in mind that for one, they're in New Jersey, so there's a time difference. Our rep is really good. She's been with the company for, I think, 30 plus years. Jackie is her name. They, I think, rotate. So they work, they're in the office for 3 weeks and then they're off for a week. So they have like a kind of like a furlough type thing. So it's possible that they might not respond right away if you call that number if you need help. So you can always email me and I can forward the email to them. Typically those would be like browser related issues, or if something really odd pops up, maybe data's not being saved right. Data's maybe being overwritten. We've had a couple people that have had that happen where stuff didn't pre-fill the right way. Kind of the information that is helpful for us on our end is kind of when you were on, like say I was working on this on Saturday afternoon, such and such date, and here's what happened. If you can take a screenshot, if you have the ability to take a screenshot, that's great too. And kind of what browser you were using. I was using Chrome version, whatever, when this occurred. This is a relatively new version of Collect. It's been around for at least 2 years, so a lot of those technical things have been pretty much ironed out, but we had a few of them reported last year. We had one library that I think they had entered some data and then it got overridden at some point with prior year data. And we were able to restore it, on our end. So it's really rare that happens, but it does happen. So just let me know and I'll forward the issue on to them. And one last plug for our ARPA formula grants. If you haven't turned those in, you have until the end of the year. So make sure you apply for those. We'll send out reminders here around the holidays. So, okay. Any other questions? No?
Nothing in the chat.
Excellent. Well, if you have anything come up after the fact, feel free to let me know.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you for all the information,
Yeah,
Sam.
thank you. Do I need to make you the host again, or are you co-host?
I'm
Okay.
your co-host, so it's all good.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thank you, Sam. And we're getting thank yous in. So
Stay warm.
yeah. Thanks.